Hello, everybody. Welcome to our talk titled Crafting the Immersive World of Gigaya. Today, we're going to deep dive into the tech, tools, and workflows that we used in building and crafting the world and characters and story of the project. And before we go into the details of things, I want to do a quick intro because with me today, I have two other team members, which they will do their intros, but I'll start with myself first. So I'm Alitt. I'm the creative director for the internal productions team based here in Copenhagen, Denmark. And my role in the project is to define and drive the visual, creative, and game direction of the project. So I'm going to pass the mic to Stefania for her to do her intro.
Hi, I'm Stefania. I'm a senior lighting artist in the internal productions team here at Unity.
Hi, I'm Dany. I'm based in Montreal, and I'm the cinematic artist responsible for the intro cinematic.
All right, so what are we covering today? So we are going to cover, the first part will be from ideas to the screen, and then we're going to share a lot about how we achieve the unique visual identity of the project. And then Danny is going to cover cinematography and the tech behind it. So I'm going to play a trailer that we've prepared just for all of you.
Where are we?
The Oasis, where the Gigaya's powers were harnessed. The settlers, they left a long time ago.
Why did they leave?
The juice wasn't worth as much as it cost to harvest. Now it's nothing but ruins crawling with wildlife. There does appear to be more than meets the eye here. Great work getting the power back on.
Thank you, kid. I didn't think we'd ever come back online since they turned the power off. I have no purpose if there are no settlers. The view will be stunning once we get up there.
If we get up there are a lot of dangerous things between us and the Gigaya. Almost like they're protecting it.
An even better reason why we're gonna open it.
Time to try something new.
So, what is Gigaya? So, Gigaya is a high production value sample game, and we built it to provide Unity creators and developers like yourselves inspiration and guidance in the features and best practices that we've used, and you all can apply to your own projects. We also want to share a lot of our experiences and be transparent about it. And then we also want to amplify our user success because Gigaya is an evolving project. And it's also an effort to show that we are investing in both improving our tech and wanting to help users be successful. So how can Gigaya help you? So when we build this and when we will eventually publish it, and release it to the hands of our users, these are a number of things we hope Gigaya can help you. So it would help you spark your creative ambitions. Gigaya could be used as a learning tool to help you grow and improve your artistry and workflows, as well as level up your programming skills. All right, so when we talk about what makes a good game, so more often than not, it would cover these three things and more, of course. But these three things we believe is what makes a game good So a game that has fun gameplay. So when you have a game that has a character controller, you would play it, you would have fun with it, you would enjoy the game mechanics and the game features. And when the game has an immersive world, it's a good-looking world, or it's a world that puts you in there. The player enjoys being in there. If there's a story, player would love the story, follow it. And then when both are done really well, it is shipped on a platform of choice or multi-platform, and it runs really well. It plays really well on the hardware. So these three things are also how we approach our productions, and also in Gigaya. And today we want to cover immersive world as the topic of title is. So let's start with ideas to the screen. So we'll cover a bit on vision and visual direction, how we use kit bashing and layering to really create a really good looking level art, and also how we leverage shader graph and a few other things. So this is the premise of the game. So when we started it, and when I started to think about what is it that we want to create immersion into the project, and I wrote this short sentence, and then working with the team, we developed it further. So the game itself, or the story, is about self-discovery. It's about friendship and about unleashing the hero within. So in the project or in the game, you will play as Wandu. He is the main character. He is, he's going to take adventures throughout this game, throughout the story, and he is an unlikely hero that, what he'll do throughout his adventures is he's going to unlock the secrets and the stories of Gigaya so that he can protect the legacy. And when I was crafting or drafting the visual look and the visual identity of the project, what was important for me was getting that duality in all the things we do in the visual aspect of the project. So starting from light and shadows. So when you play in the environment and you traverse through areas, there are parts where you're in the dark and then you exit an area and you hit the light. So it's really nice feeling of this contrast. And then as the environment is in the oasis, but it's surrounded by water, so you get this warm and cold feeling, and that's a really nice contrast as well. And the environment, also the structures in the scene, it's built with big blocks, wood, concrete, metal, and there's a lot of straight lines and chunky stuff, but we layer them with detailed objects to break the silhouette, to get much more interesting look to the structures. Also, we use decals and graffitis to show a lot of this weathering and also break up the surfaces. So these are a lot of the things we put in to really achieve that duality. Here's a quick graphic facts that is in the project, among many. I just want to highlight them as we will cover a lot of them in the talk today. And what I would want to highlight as well is that we use the Unity editor, vanilla, the universal render pipeline as well as vanilla. And what that means is we use it out of the box. We don't change it, modify the source code, or create a custom render pipeline, because we really wanted to stay true to use things that all of you users use, and to showcase what can be done with those. And in a project, it's always nice to look back at where we started and then see where we are today. And in the video you can see right now, there's shots where we did a lot of block out, prototyping and all that. It's a platforming game, so we built a lot of platforms around, and that gave us a lot of inspiration, and it translated pretty well into the final game. So when you could see here, platforming allowed us to explore ideas of collectibles, and you can traverse through, jump around, and go around the environment. And you can see how the game evolved. We had a gym for enemies, and they were crawling at first on the walls. But then, as we developed it further and integrated it into the game, we improved it and made it a flying enemy. So we could place it in a lot of places. The shooting mechanic, for example, it pretty much carried all the way as well into the end game. And we also used or improved it a lot, changed it a lot so that when we added enemies, it felt really well. And then here you can see platforming on water. So a lot of the blockouts and pieces were still there. Of course, it looked much prettier as the artists came in and start adding a lot of level art. So for us as a group, it was really, really nice to see all this. So looking back from the beginning of things and all the way to where we are today. And a lot of that we achieved through layering things. So for example, let's take this shot from the start area. So this is how it looks right now. And then this is roughly when the first pass of level art was done. So a lot of structures were put in, structures were there, terrain was done in a much more rudimentary way, quick pass there. And then the artist started adding a bit more vegetation on the terrain, like grass, little plants. Then they added some ornaments and the red cloth that moves with the wind and all that. And then a little bit more ground elements. And then a lot more things like the growth, the vines on that door frame, and then boxes and props here and there, and then decals to really show and bring a little bit of grunge to the scene. And then some fog just to create that depth and layering to the scene as well. And a lot of that was achieved with many, many things. But one thing I would highlight is how the artists used shader graph extensively, like a lot throughout their creation of the environment. So in this example, it's the basic lit shader that was made by our tech artists, and it allowed our artists to have a lot of control on the color, so that just changing a few colors, you could get nice variation. And in this example, on the roof tile. Another thing we did, so the artists added a lot of these ornaments and decoration things in door frames and throughout the level. So of course, if we use dynamic on every single thing, it would cost us too much performance. So what they built was a vertex offset shader that allowed the artist to have a few values or parameters to tweak. And we can get like nice dynamic movement and simulate how these things would move in the wind. It was really nice to see all this done and put in the level, but didn't cost us a lot on performance. And for the walls and the structures, so it's the area is an abandoned village. So what the artists wanted to achieve was that look of layers in the paint and the wall. So with the shader, the blend shader, the artist could set it up and then paint off or paint on, whichever they choose, the details of the wall. So a painted wall could have layers underneath it, brick layers, and then the broken concrete layer. So all this was achievable with good setup using shader graph. And shader graph wasn't just used only on the environment. Our character artist, Juan, used shader graph extensively on the character as well. So in this example, in the video, Juan used shader graph to create a hair shader. So the hair, we wanted a lot of layers to it, even though it was a stylized character. We wanted it to kind of simulate how a hair would have a lot of layers, how it would react to light, And having this control of colors and the control of how shiny we wanted the hair to be, also how transparent we want the hair to be, this shader graph allows us to achieve that. So I believe what shader graph did was really enable a character artist like Juan to have a lot of control and creative freedom to explore and express his craft and art. Like the shader he did for the clothes. So the setup allowed him to tweak quickly some color combination. And then, once he's happy, he can just keep a version and then carry on and tweak other things before he shows it to me to get approval. Like for this one, he built his own skin shader, which was really amazing to see because he didn't need to go to find a shader engineer or anything. He just quickly used shader graph, build a skin shader, tweak something, and then he wanted to try it out. He can drop it into the game scene that has a lot of lighting and post-processing, much more accurate to the game look. And it helped a lot in the iteration of the character creation. So now we go to the part on how we achieve the unique visual identity of Gigaya. This part will be Stefania's part. She's going to cover a lot of the lighting and rendering of the project.
So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the lighting in the level. We started with the big elements, which are the main composition, the mood and feel, which would be the vibrant heat of the oasis, and the grading and post-processing. The smaller things would be the reflection light probe setups and the little beautiful corners, which include some real-time and big blend. To trace back the journey, we started looking at the high-level concepts and the art direction vision. The time of day, which is the sun, how is the sun directed? Is it nighttime or is it daytime? The post-process, that means like the colors and how warm, cold we want it. Then we will dive in deep in the reflection probes. I'm going to talk a little bit about lighting probes and some real-time lights, how we baked, and the performance considerations for our project. So the big picture, that refers to the high-level vision that we got was we need to have a vibrant heat, feel the oasis, and a way to represent that would be with the colors and having cooler shadows and a mix of both. In the case of Gigaya, like you can see in the concept art, we looked at exploring having some areas with the contrast of light shadow and some shadow plays to give a bit more of a dynamic look in an outdoor scene. To begin lighting, the first thing was to set a sun position. It was, after some testing, determined that maybe the best position would be directed to the main puzzle of the game, which in Gigaya would be the main vault that is located around the middle of the level. It also frames it very well as one who passes through some areas of the level. It comes out of a tunnel and then you can see that. So it was a very good focus area to guide the player over there. Next, another consideration once we set up that was we have to play with the shadows and the lights. So starting to talk about the shadows, picked an intensity that was a bit more natural. So it would contrast, so the contrast wouldn't be too harsh between the light areas and the shadow areas. And I tinted blue, that I would talk a little bit more about it in the post-processing part. For the heat of the oasis, it was important to get a good sun position high up in the sky, and the temperature was modified to be a bit warmer. The shadow play was there, so looking at the cold shadows and the warmth of the oasis, we achieved this look like this with the sun. Another thing we added was the use of fog. And we have two fogs that I will describe. The first one is the linear fog, which is the one that is included in Unity in the lighting tab in environment. And this one can be adjusted with colors. So we went for something a bit blue, and this would help us blend in the ocean and the sky to give it a better blend and look. Also, it helps us with the distance. That way, the things that are further away look further away than they are and closer, so it gives it a nice depth. Combined with that fog, we used Cronex's in the asset store fog. They have a fog that is that includes native directional light support with shadows, including a cascade option, and it has native URP spot and point light support with shadows, fast point light options, and fog of war with interactive editor. So it was a very good mix to have this with the already Unity fog that works in the background. This one works more in the level. So they were very nice together. After that, another consideration was to select a sky dome. So for Gigaya, we picked something that was blue, and very intense and with some shadows, so it wouldn't be too flat. And with the sky, we wanted to make some fluffy clouds, as we call them, and those I will show right now. This is actually one without the HDRI sky and the fluffy shadow, so this is missing the HDRI. And when I switch to the next slide, you can see how the sky really occupies part of the most of the scene that the player sees when you're in the bottom of the oasis. So the sky was very important. So after the sky, we used these fluffy clouds that were made by Andre, our tech artist for URP. He made these clouds that are made in shader graph, and they're able to move. Here's a video of them speed up with some of the critters, viewing some of the critters and some of the water. So the clouds form. This is in real speed, but when you're looking at it, you could actually see the movement. It's just a bit more natural. After that was said, another thing that I must talk about is the post-process and the volume. So the post-process do a lot for the scene. So in this example, we have the oasis with the post-process on. And I will describe what we did, but this is already like the final image. The way it's constructed is by using several things. The first image you see here is without the post, so it's the natural colors is very raw. There's nothing layered. So I believe the first thing that is the best thing you can do is add tone mapping. So that's what we did. This tone mapping is the ACES, which is the standard in the films industry. So it's a very good base for starting with the post. The next, I used a little bit of split toning, where the shadows are a bit lifted, so they're not too dark to create not as much contrast and make it look unnatural. And the highlights are a bit pulled down, so they are not overly bright. The balance is balanced as a little bit, but it's very, very discreet how much balance we put. Then the gamma again is also not as much, but it adds a little bit of blue hue in the midtones. Then we did some color adjustments with the contrast. This was increased a little bit just to give it a bit more of a punch. And then the saturation was increased small as well to give more vibrancy, but not too much. Then we used the channel mixer to decrease the greens and blues and bring out the reds in the scene. After that, we also took care of having a bloom setting. So we set up a bloom setting that would work well in some of the areas where we use more local post filters that I will describe after. We also used a little white balance and field grain, but this is very just a hint, so it looks a bit more natural. Here is the effect that the bloom gives us. So aside from the main post that is set on the level, we have this local post that allows us to have some areas with more light control. In this case, we can see how when you go out, the bloom increases or decreases depends on where you are. So the bloom inside the tunnel is set higher than the outside. So the blending difference gives us that adaptation effect. Here it is how it looks in the editor. So it is a volume that is set up to create that effect and some space for transitioning. So you have a little bit of blend distance between the outside and the inside. These are placed in all the indoor areas, and they all create this very controlled adaptation that you would naturally see with your eyes. Another of the local volumes we decided to place was a height volume. This is one that is placed on the top of the level to make the areas that are below look farther away than they are. This is how it looks when it's on. So as you can see, it blurs out the background. And this is done by using the depth of field. And we modified the focus distance and the focal length and aperture. So it works just like a camera. After all the main things are done, then I'm going to talk a little bit about what was next, which was placing reflection probes, light probes, real-time lights, baking, and reflects. So the first thing to cover is the reflection probes. This one in the image is the main reflection probe, which is covers the whole level. And this one helps us to give us a good base. So it would, in case we don't have areas with reflection probes, it falls back to this one. So it's important to place it near the ground to avoid all the objects to be coated with a blue hint from the sky, because it captures everything around it. So that's what we did. One of the considerations when placing reflection probes is that they only support 2 overlapping reflections at a time, and also avoid placing them between geometries. It can happen later when moving objects around. They sometimes get trapped, so it's good to check for this because this can cause some inaccuracies in the way the objects reflect. One of the things you can do to help with performance would be to reduce the resolution of them. So in Gigaya, we have them at 64 resolution, and the main one is set a bit higher because it's the fallback one and it's pretty big. So when I talked about earlier about placing the main reflection probe and other probes close to the ground in this case, or when they're intersecting, this is an example of how it would look when it's not working. So on the sides, you see in the buildings, there are some reflections that are blue and not accurate. And this is one that is properly set up with all the reflection probes, and they are all placed correctly. So you can see the strange artifacts are gone. So it looks a bit more accurate. We have, unfortunately, some limitations when working with European reflection probes. And the main one is that the reflection probes do not rotate currently because of performance problems. And so one way to tackle this is just trying to place them carefully. It can cause problems with some objects, especially if they're not heading towards a different axis. So just keep that in mind when placing them around. So the overlaps are not in weird places. It's challenging, but it's possible to make it work as we did in Gigaya. Moving on to the light probes, these ones are placed wherever there is a light change. So when you have a shadow area and a light area, or one color changes to another, we place 1 or 2 to capture those changes. So when we have things passing by, it captures it as if it was a real time, but in reality, it's baked information of the scene. So it's a very good idea to place them, especially when using baked lighting, like we did in Gigaya. This is also baked. So now that we mentioning the bake, Gigaya is actually made using mixed lighting, which means we have the sun, which is real time, and some baked lights and shadows that produce light maps. So most of the lights are baked, but some of them we did using real time, and I will describe those as well as how we did the baking. So Before I get into that, I would like to talk about some of the quality settings considerations. So we have set up 3 quality settings, one that is lower, one medium, and then one high. And depending on the device, it would select one, or you can select one. The higher one being the best quality you can get, it affects shadows, and the lower one is for lower performance devices, so it runs better in mobile phones, for example, or lower performing computers. And the change is not that much visually, only in the shadows. This is where it affects, as you can see in the video that played. One of the things when doing a bake, which is using bake things, is selecting what are the best settings for it, because you have to have a balance between how long it takes to bake and the quality of the bake. So sometimes we cannot spend too much time baking, or there's not a dedicated computer for it. So sometimes the best thing is to find a balance. So in this case, after some testing, we came up with these settings, which is bakes in an RTX 3080 Ti, and it takes about 40 minutes using the progressive GPU map baker. The reason we're using the GPU instead of the CPU is because in GPU, it bakes a lot faster. So that is one of the things. Another thing we added is directional mode. That is important because it gives you better quality on the bakes. So we use that for Gigaya. We limit the bounces to 4 because it is really very small difference what we get after that. So these were the settings where we could get the best for the good amount of baking time. After this is one part, the baking lights. Now I'm going to talk about the real-time lights. So we have some real-time lights that we decided to place because it improves the look and because you are able to turn them on and off. For example, we have these real-time lights that work with a light triggering tool that Enelin from our production team in Tools Programmer, she made that works. It works as with 2 different colliders, one that is on the outside sphere and an inside sphere. The difference between the inside and the outside would be the fade distance of them. So what happens when the character walks into the sphere, the light turns on. So this is very important for having good performing real-time lights, since URP doesn't support the light fades. So this is the solution we came up with for Gigaya specifically. So these spheres can be adjusted to match depending on the level. And the case I'm showing is placed. So as soon as you go in, it fades in, or you can make the fade smaller, but it gives us a good balance between look and also good performance for this. It turns off as soon as you go in. So this leaves us with 2 performance considerations. We learned that having too many reflection probes causes a lot of drop in performance. This is also the resolution of those reflection probes needs to be lowered so we can have a good balance. So having bigger reflection probes in URP is actually a lot better. So we have to use broader strokes instead of details in some areas. Too many overlapping lights. This is about the real-time lights, as baked lights don't have as much performance impact because they are baked. So real-time lights cannot be very close to an overlapping, especially one of the point lights, because they are very performance heavy. Too many shadow casters or receivers. This is also for real-time lights. If you have too many shadow casters, it increases in performance, especially in real-time. Baked is very long cascade shadows. In Gigaya, we have set the cascades to be only a few meters, 50 meters, I believe, and that way you get a good balance between performance and what you can see. So after the cascade is where the baked shadow kicks in. So we're using real-time shadows at all times around us, but it's a very short distance to avoid performance issues. And again, too many real-time lights. So it's always a good idea to limit the amount of real-time lights. So some of the learnings is that we were able to determine a good workflow for lighting in URB. A good idea is to start with the big details. So begin with the sun and make initial plans, concept art to things to make it look what you want. It's good to plan it out. When you're baking, it's really good to iterate with speed. Use low resolution bakes. This will save you a lot of time because at the beginning you will rebake a lot. Be mindful of the amount of reflection probes and lights in your scene. The size of your bake resolutions, the reflection probes, these all have big impacts in performance. So be mindful from the beginning. That way it will save a lot of time later when cleaning up. And real-time lighting is okay. Just using very little of it is sometimes better when working with URV. So the current focus on lighting right now, we're still working on performance and to optimize more so we can get a better performing with. And now I'm going to pass it to Dany.
So thanks, Stefania. Thanks, Alitt. Now let's take a look at the process we went through while building the intro cinematic. We'll go over the tools and features we used, as well as the workflow that allowed us to put this together in the time frame that we had. Let's start by watching the whole intro.
I told you not to trust them! That wasn't part of the plan. Yeah, whatever. Now tell me, oh wise one, what is your plan? Where should we go now?
So the intro cinematic is an extremely critical element as it is the player's very first contact with the game universe. So we have less than a minute to present the characters, the location, the narrative. We have about 39 seconds to be exact. So therefore the storytelling here is extremely important. And introducing the world, introducing Wandu's personality and his relationship with Minda, the companion, were essential elements that we wanted to establish. A few quick facts about the team and the tech behind the cinematic. The whole work was done over the course of around 5 days. We had one cinematic artist, one environment artist, one VFX artist, an audio designer, and a lighting artist. For the tech, we used mainly sequences, more on that in a bit, Cinemachine, recorder, VFX graph, particle system, just to name a few. So here we have the very first piece of the intro. Our creative director, Alitt, wrote this in November 2021. It's a very simple but complete and solid script at the same time. So it outlines everything you need to know to imagine and build the cinematic, but at the same time, it allows the artists to unleash their creativity within the main guiding lines. And comparing this to the final version of the cinematic, you can see that they're very consistent with each other. The next step was blocking the sequence out. This allows us to get a feel of how we want to frame things, at least the most basic stuff. Enter storyboard artist. Already we can see we have a much more detailed storyboard and we have almost no placeholder elements left. At this point, the major building blocks are in and we can start refining things like the companion's character design. If I go back to the previous slide, you can see that in this version, the companion is more sci-fi, has more sci-fi designed, and in the V2, the character is more organic, more elemental, and that's really what we wanted to get to. A few iterations later, and we have our final storyboard. From this, we can derive the animatic that we'll see in a bit.
I told you not to trust them. That wasn't part of the plan. Yeah, whatever. Now tell me, oh wise one, what is your plan? Where should we go now?
The camera angles, what the environment should look like, and in general, the whole flow feels much better and much more natural here. There would still be a few changes requested by our creative director later on as we start building everything. For example, some cameras were changed, the framing of others was slightly modified, but this is a really solid base to hit the ground running. Now let's take a look at some of the tools and tech behind sequences. So the main tool we used to build the cinematic was sequences. You can get sequences from the package manager, and essentially it helps you build your cinematic, movie, or any linear content very efficiently. Why do I say efficiently? Because under the hood, sequences will automate a lot of the otherwise manual and tedious processes of creating all the necessary timelines. Not only timelines, but game objects, folder hierarchies, and any other things that you would usually need when creating such content. And as you can tell, the sequences packages leverages timeline and its UI. So we're very familiar with the UI and the way timeline works with tracks and clips, and then the hands-on of sequences is really easy for us. So notice in the screenshot, we can see the timeline of the full intro sequence, and shot 30 selected. We're going to dive into this to show what it's made of. Inside shot 30, we can see we have things organized into groups. In this screenshot, we can see character, photography, audio, FX, lighting, and the set. So those are the main groups that are replicated in all our shots. This is automatically done by sequences. On the upper left here, we see the structure of the whole cinematic. And in our case, there are 6 shots. Under it, we see the asset collections. Asset collections is a term specific to the sequences tool. So those asset collections will define how your assets will get organized, like in the previous screenshot. On the right, we have the hierarchy panel showing 2 shots and their game object prefabs. We see that they follow the exact same structure. This is very important for us because with 5 people working in the same scene, it gets very risky very quickly to step on each other's toes. So this brings me to my next point, which is working with prefabs across the board. Let's look at the hierarchy of shot 30 on the right. We have 1 prefab for the camera, 1 for audio, a couple for VFX. That's for this shot, we have a couple for VFX. Usually we'd have 1 for lighting, 1 for each character, etc. You get it. Everything's a prefab. What this allows us to do is Stefania, our lighter, or Bruno, our VFX artist, can do their work on their prefabs and save those prefabs and only those prefabs and push their respective prefabs to plastic, our version control system. And no one is allowed to modify the scene apart from the cinematic artist, in this case, myself, who prior to this has laid the foundation and created the whole structure and makes sure everything is coming into the right place. Let me pause that a second. Another extremely useful feature we used, and personally one of my favorite, is the Cinemachine Storyboard extension. That extension basically has 2 modes, and it allows us to load an image to be displayed in front of the camera. The first mode is swipe mode. It makes it easy to see if lines are aligned between 2 images, and so you can swipe left to right or right to left between your reference frame and the current camera, and it just makes it very satisfying to swipe between the 2 versions. Let's look at swipe mode. And the next mode is alpha mode. So alpha mode makes it very easy to align a camera to reference frame. I personally used it a lot when integrating our cameras to make sure the framing was consistent with our storyboard. So by fading the opacity, we can see the full images on top of each other, as opposed to the swipe, which you can only see parts of each image at a time. But it's also very useful. So really, each option has its advantages and use cases. Alitt, our creative director, is a big fan of the swipe mode. Shots breakdown. So let's have a quick look at some shots breakdown. The first one we'll start with is the very first shot of the whole intro cinematic. I really love this shot. There's so much going on here. So let's play it from the final look. Start with the final look and then pause. Improve the water, add some sea foam, add the portal, foreground to add some depth, get a crab in there, more details to the foreground, make the water reflections better, environment VFX, some sand prints for the crab, and finally, more dust. As you can see, all the layering and details and iteration really allow us to bring this shot to the next level and make it what it is. Another breakdown is shot 30. Let's have a look at it. We start with a play blast from Maya. Once we were satisfied with the animation, brought it over to Unity, added proper lighting, props, textures and materials, environment VFX, some grading, and boom, you have the final shot. As you already know by now, time was a luxury we didn't have for the intro cinematic. That meant we needed to be extremely smart and economical with our time and how we chose to do things. So one of those choices we made was in regards to VFX. Since we already had a lot of VFX for the game, we thought, why not reuse them? And even if we needed to tweak some bits of them to fit our needs better, they would just be minor tweaks and would avoid us going back from scratch. So for example, the portal has shared effects between shared textures between the dash and the portal. The box kick in the third shot also uses the same effect as the dash. The small light particles were reused as is from the game. Some elements of that dust cloud, when Wandu crashes into the boxes, are shared with the environment dust as well. And the smoke trail for when Wandu flies out of the portal is the same as the dash smoke. And then finally, the butterflies are the exact same as the ones in the game. In some cases, like for the dash, for the smoke trail, or the box kick dust trail, it was easier for us to use particle system because of those fast-moving situations. We noticed that the particle system was rendering the effect closer to what we wanted to achieve. And so that's why we chose to go with particle system as opposed to the VFX graph. There's a lot of little things we put in that add tremendous value to the shots, individually and the sequence as a whole. So both in terms of depth and especially continuity. And again, because of the tight frame we had, the team really went all in to be able to get those in there. So let's take two shots. Let's watch them once. And then if you blinked, you already missed it. So I'll make it easier. That box right there, in the first of the two shots, right after Wandu's crash landing, it tumbles down onto his head and onto the floor in front of him. Then in the following shots, when Wandu gets up, he kind of channels all his frustration into this little box. So what might seem like a small thing is actually a fully thought of intentional thing that is essential in creating continuity and a smooth flow throughout the shots. Another case of attention to detail, let's take a look at the left side of this video, and more specifically the tall grass cutting through the wooden crate on the left side. So at this point, I think we were already finalizing the whole cinematic and rendering out our final versions. And the creative director, Alitt, tells me, "Hey, Dany, I think I spot something. I think there's something we need to fix." But it was a small scare, because since everything is in real time, it was an easy fix. So what did we do? We moved the crate a bit to the left, a bit back, and then we're done. 20 minutes later, the new version is out in 4K, and we can move on. So same thing for the butterflies in the back. Let's watch that again. So on the left, you can see the butterflies are way too close to the camera, and then not only are they going through some of the props, but then they're crowding the space too much as well. So also we pushed those to the back. Another pretty cool shot is this little piece where Wandu flicks a crab off his shoulder. You can really see the facial expressions, the disgust on Wandu's face, and then really the flick from the back of the hand as he pushes the crab off his shoulder. And when you watch it in the final version, coupled with the audio, it's really satisfying. Another thing we wanted to explore and achieve was making the transition from the intro cinematic to the gameplay as smooth and as seamless as possible. We wanted to retain player engagement and allow them to jump right in after the cinematic without breaking the immersion that would have built up until that moment. So let's take a look at the transition first. And this is where it all happens. Like this very moment where we cut to the next shot is where we transition from the cinematic to the gameplay camera. You can see the game UI fading in as well at the end of that second shot. First of all, we took advantage of the camera cut to choose the timing and the moment correctly. Second, Cinemachine is an absolute wonder to work with for a lot of things, but especially when blending cameras. We'll see that in a bit. So because we wanted to push the visual quality of the cinematic to get as much as possible out of URP, like for example, higher quality settings for lighting and shadows, or any other element really, without worrying about the cost and performance, we decided to render the first 5 shots of the intro as a video that we would play in the build, and then have the 6th shot play in real time. So here we can clearly see in this video the part of the timeline where the video plays, and then after that, shot 60, during which we transition to gameplay. We'll dive into shot 60 to really see how this happens. And the red track that you can see is the Cinemachine track. So as you can see by the downward curve, the active camera is blending out to let the gameplay camera take over. And now you know why I was saying that Cinemachine handles this perfectly. To explain a bit more about the setup of playing the video and the build, we have the setup we have for the first 5 shots. What's going on is essentially there's a game object with a video player component, as you can see on the left side of the screenshot, that reads the video file and outputs the result to a target rendered texture. That rendered texture is then assigned as the texture on the canvas. So really it's a fairly simple setup, but it required some experimentation from our tools programmer, Emeline, to determine the right format and specs for the video. Basically the sweet spot between quality and performance. So now that we've taken this whole thing apart and look at all the different pieces from script and storyboard to animation and continuity to the finer details and perfecting each shot, let's take a final look at the end result.
I told you not to trust them! That wasn't part of the plan. Yeah, whatever. Now tell me, oh wise one, what is your plan? Where should we go now?
A few benefits and learnings that we can highlight from this whole production. Saving our frames in 4K was incredibly fast because, and we say saving because the frame is actually already rendered in Unity, and then the only thing we're doing is we're saving it on disk. And so it was taking about 2 frames per second for ProRes, so about 20 minutes for the whole video, the whole intro cinematic. And then this speed of working changes everything. It's already been mentioned, I don't know how many times, but really being able to work this fast is game-changing on multiple aspects. First, we're always seeing the final image on screen when we're working. And this is essential not only for artists, but also for anyone involved in the production. Like artists can work in context all the time with lighting, environment, VFX, and then anybody involved in a production can see the final result or the state we're in without having to imagine what it will look like in the final render. Second, dropping in assets or swapping them is done effortlessly. Third, creative direction is not bound by the worry of iteration time. Trying out alternate camera angles, for example, or experimenting with any aspect of the production can be done with minimal hindrance to the rest of the production. And that's something that we did many times with Alitt. We would try a different camera move or a different framing or different lighting, and then it would really have minimal impact on our deadline and our timing. And lastly, we were outputting a new version with the latest changes twice a day, so roughly every 12 hours, to monitor updates and to use as a reference for reviews and sharing. And that would not have been possible without real-time rendering. So if we were using offline rendering, I don't think we could have achieved the same thing, at least not without a mighty render farm. So at the moment, we're working on the outro cinematic. We're taking this opportunity to apply and pressure test the learnings and methodologies we got from our experience with the intro cinematic. And of course, we're aiming to maintain and hopefully improve on the work efficiency we had, as well as the quality of the final output. So hopefully this little dive into the intro cinematic was beneficial and interesting for all of you. And then we hope to amaze you again with our outro and all the rest of the work we do with Gigaya.
All right. Thank you, Dany and Stefania. There was a lot of things we covered in the lighting part and the cinematics part. So here's a quick summary of what we've covered today. So we covered a lot of things from ideation to the screen, the visual direction, the story and the premise. And then we went to cover the lighting and rendering. And then we closed off with the cinematics and the tech behind it. So we really hope you enjoyed what we shared. We really hope that it gave you insights on the things we've done and used to really bring and create the immersive world of Gigaya. And I believe that is it from us. Yes, so thank you so much, Shishini. And if you want to know more about the project, please check out the link that you can see there in the slide. And you can also sign up from that website, sign up to our newsletter, that you will then be the first to get all our updates once we start sharing them up. Thank you so much. Hope you will enjoy the rest of the event. Take care and bye-bye.